The hum above the bottles hit the wrong note for a Friday fluorescence buzzing a thin, exhausted B-flat that fought a jukebox chewing the same chorus. Heat wore the room like a damp shirt. The air smelled of fry oil, spilled beer, lemon cleaner, and the sharp metal tang of a neon sign that wrote "Open like a dare." Danielle Carter sat beneath that dare with her sister, Dominique, hands around sweating glasses that tasted of lime and the end of patience. The mirror behind the bar doubled the world. Two sisters, two drinks, 24 shoulders turned the other way, and kept one eye on a pegboard of bar tools, hung as neat as surgical instruments. Danielle liked rooms where every tool had a hook. It made her believe decisions could be hung back in place. A shadow lengthened across their table. Chair legs shrieked. A man dragged wood like he wanted the whole room to hear his entrance, spun the chair backward, and folded over it as if about to announce policy. Sergeant Rick Dalton didn't bother to hide the badge, still clipped to his civilian belt. Whiskey mellowed his breath and sharpened his grin. "Back off," Danielle said without looking at him, still watching the mirror. Calm, flat, the kind of voice that invites a choice and measures the outcome. "Or what?" he said, leaning in so close, the fluorescence glazed his eyes. "You gonna make me, sweetheart?" Mark Stevens slid into place behind Dominique's chair, a meaty hand settling on the backrest. Like a claim, Kyle Boyd swayed at the perimeter, too young to wear that smirk, too drunk to hide it. His hand played with his cuffs like a kid, fingering a magic trick. "Evening," Mark said. "They teach manners where you girls come from." Dominique's fingers tightened on her glass, but she didn't give him a profile. "Take your hand off my chair," she said, each word clean as a cut. "Now." Phones went quiet. Someone at the bar zipped a purse very carefully. A man in a team cap studied baseball scores with religious focus. Behind the counter, Luis polished the same spotless circle, jaw clenched hard enough to ache. "Last warning," Danielle said, lifting her chin until her eyes found Dalton's in the mirror. She didn't get up. She didn't have to. "Walk away while you can." "That's cute," he said. "You think you're in charge?" Mark's grip slid from the chair to Dominique's shoulders, thumbs pressing, testing. Dominique took one breath like she was turning a page inside herself. "Let go," she repeated, softer. The room leaned to hear it. "Or what?" Mark squeezed. "Call the police." They laughed together at their own joke. Kyle bumped the table. Condensation rings smeared like small escapes. Luis angled over with a tray of empties. He didn't need to move. "Gentlemen." "Shut it, Luis," Dalton said, eyes never leaving Danielle. "Go wash something before I check your papers again." Color climbed Luis's throat. He swallowed it. "Sergeant, not in my bar." Kyle turned his grin toward Dominique and bent close enough she could count the broken capillaries in his cheeks. "You two must be twins," he said, hands sketching a sloppy hourglass. "Double the—" "Choose your next word carefully," Dominique said. The air raised it for her. Danielle's right hand drifted toward her purse. Dominique flicked her a look. The quick 8th grade shake they'd invented behind a school bus. "Not now. Pick the ground. Pick the time." Dalton saw it and smiled wide. "Got a little something you want to show the class?" "Princess." "Lipstick," Danielle said. "Wrong shade for you." Mark leaned down until his breath warmed her shoulder. No respect for authority. "Fixable." In the corner, a kid lifted his phone like a stretch. Kyle was on him in 2 wobbling steps, snatching the device and slinging it. It shattered on hardwood, a glitter of dead pixels skittering under shoes. "Here's what happens next," Dalton said, comedian face replaced by cop face. "You apologize for your attitude. You buy us around. We forget about this little disrespect. Danielle took a long sip and set the glass down just so, letting the click land. Here's what actually happened. You take your hands off my sister, you step back from our table, and you leave us alone. Right now you're making a very big mistake. Threat. Dalton murmured. His smile didn't reach his eyes. You hear a threat. Boys. Sewer did. Kyle beamed. Definitely, Mark said, digging his fingers in hard enough to bruise. Dalton rose slow as a sermon and slid around Dominique with surprising speed for a man that drunk. The slap cracked through the room like the first shot of a hunting season. Laughter followed, shrill and high. Dominique stood so fast. Her chair toppled. Color climbed her face and left it again. For a second her hands trembled, then they went still. Danielle lunged and hit wood. Mark pinned her to the wall with the practiced efficiency of a man who enjoys the practice. The paneling bit her cheek. Stay still. He breathed, hot and sour. Unless you want resisting. Rick reached again. Dominique knocked his hand away so hard. Her knuckles stung. Touch me, she said, voice trembling with a controlled fire that made the hair on Kyle's arms lift. And you'll pull back a stump. Kyle produced his cuffs with a magician's flourish, metal clinking like cheap jewelry at the wrong ceremony. Luis stepped in again because decent men don't get to sleep otherwise. Please, he said, hands raised. They didn't. Dalton had his collar before the sentence finished. One more word and immigration tours your stockroom. He shoved him back. Luis's phone blinked a tiny red eye from the apron pocket and kept blinking. A woman near the jukebox lifted her phone with shaking hands. Kyle grabbed it and pancaked it to the floor. The screen spidered and died. Up, Dalton ordered. Let's go have a talk. Mark wrenched Danielle's arms back. Kyle pulled Dominique's wrists together and ratcheted the cuffs too tight, measuring power in clicks. Pain shot up her forearms and burned her elbows. She gave him silence sharp enough to cut himself on later. They marched the sisters toward the door. People parted like water around a knife. No one met their eyes. No one said their names. At the threshold, Dalton paused to enjoy himself, because men like him always do. Waste, he said softly, reaching for Dominique's hair. The leather case slid from Dominique's back pocket and fell hard enough to be heard. It opened at the hinge. Gold found the bad light and threw it back. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Dominique said, voice steady and clear enough to carry. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. Phones reappeared like wildflowers after a burn. Fotzes turned. The room made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a prayer. Dalton stared one heartbeat longer than a smart man. Then he put the toe of his boot to the badge and skittered it across scuffed planks. That card means nothing here, he said. He tipped his head toward the street. My town, my rules. Kyle cinched the cuffs until the metal bit bone. Danielle found Dominique's eyes across the space between bodies and time. We knew they'd push. We didn't know how far. We can work with that. Outside, humidity slapped. Fluorescent fixtures over the door hummed louder, like they approved. A patrol car idled at the curb, its presence less accident than appointment. Asphalt held the day's heat and returned it in waves. Careful there, Mark said when Danielle stumbled on the cracked step, catching herself with her shoulder. Wouldn't want to add falling down drunk to the charges. Through the bar's front windows, warped glass that made the world look drunk. Faces watched without being seen. Louis stood framed in neon, apron crooked, phone still blinking that tiny, stubborn red. The engine deepened its idle to a purr. Street lamps tossed light across the sisters' faces in bars, like foreshadowing with poor taste. They reached the car. Kyle shoved Dominique's head down too late because cruelty likes visible bruises. Danielle slid in after her. knees banging Mittel. The door closed with the finality of a certain kind of paperwork. Dalton leaned into the driver's side window and spoke to the uniform behind the wheel like he was ordering dessert. "Take the long way," he said, eyes on the rear seat. "Show our federal friends some local hospitality." The radio muttered static. The car pulled away slow. Lights off, confidence on. The partition gridded the world into squares. Danielle reached across the small meanness of the back seat until her shoulder ached and found Dominique's cuffed hands, cool metal against her fingers. Their foreheads met for the length of one deep breath. "They think they know our ground," Danielle whispered, breath steadying itself. "They don't, not yet," Dominique said. They both glanced at the rear window where the bar's neon shrank to a smear. In that smear, a tiny, pulsing red dot traveled with them until the turn hit it. The hum of the car swallowed the bar's bad B-flat and replaced it with its own low frequency, a note that reminded Danielle of server rooms and air handlers and the kind of systems men like Dalton mistake for the world because they've never had to imagine anything else. She closed her eyes and counted not seconds, not blocks, but beats. When to take a breath, when to let anger pass through like weather, when to look up, when to drop something that would make a sound. Her cheek burned where wood had pressed it. The cuff bruised bone. So be it. Tools have hooks. Choices have hinges. She pictured her badge case on the floor, the hinge glinting as it fell open, the way a hinge turns pressure into motion. Kyle's laugh from the front seat had the high edge of a boy who thinks the story is over because the people he fears the most, women who won't flinch, are sitting down. Mark mumbled something about paperwork. Dalton said nothing, which told her everything. He had moved from performance to calculation. Good, she thought. Men get sloppy when they think they're authors. At the corner by the shuttered feed store, the patrol car turned right instead of left. The glow of the station sign was a faint smear in the wrong direction. Dominique's shoulder touched hers again. They looked at each other. No panits, just an adjustment of the map. "Okay," Danielle said, barely audible. "Okay." Dominique echoed. The car rolled through a light that should have been red. Sirens didn't rise. No one stopped them. When power wears plainclothes, it doesn't need sirens. Past the old mill, the air cooled by a degree and picked up a ribbon of river, mud, and metal, and the green rot smell that says a town is more honest near water. Danielle felt her mouth go dry. She welcomed it. Thirst keeps you sharp. Behind them, somewhere inside a bar with a broken phone and unbroken courage, a red dot kept blinking. Ahead, a rectangle of fluorescent light opened on a door she didn't know yet. Between those two lights, the small, stubborn one behind, the institutional one ahead, the car carried them over a bridge stamped with a hairline crack in the concrete rail. White and thin, the kind of flaw that isn't a failure so much as a record. Everything strong remembers pressure. The station breathed mildew and old coffee. Heat clung to the corridor where windows didn't open, and power did. Fluorescence hung on chains and hummed like captive insects. A vending machine rattled as if rehearsing testimony. Somewhere, a copier ticked through a ream click. Drag. Thunk the sound of paper becoming fact. "Booking," Sergeant Dalton said, "high on process now." He nudged a grease-smeared binder across a counter, nicked by years. Desk Sergeant Porter didn't look up from his crossword. 4 letters for mercy. "E pensiled non." Kyle's knuckles tapped Danielle's spine as they walked, cuffs dimpling skin. Mark's grip on Dominique's arm was a vice tuned to irritation. The intake window framed a fan warped by dust. It pushed hot air from one mistake to another. Full inventory. Portasaihil pulling plastic tubs. Shoes. Jewelry, phones, whitened tape marked lines on the floor where people were supposed to stand and be smaller. A laminated card listed rights in faded patriotic colors. The bottom edge had been chewed by boredom. A camera lens in the corner wore a bright red dot that never blinked. Names, Dalton said, pen already moving. He spoke as he wrote, turning lies into cursive, disturbing the peace, threatening officers, resisting. Danielle's cheek, still raw from wood, itched under sweat. "You're fabricating," she said. "A weather report." "Write slower," Dominique added, "so the fiction doesn't smear." Dalton smiled without teeth. "You think saying agent changes my building?" He wrote their names and left the titles off. The pen dug grooves only light could read. Porter slid the tubs. Plastic sang. Kyle bagged Danielle's watch and spelled her last name wrong. The property tag's carbon paper took the insult like it had practice. "Step forward," Porter said. He aimed a camera older than anyone wanted to admit. Flash, flash. Each picture shaved detail into a record that would outlast truth if no one argued. Arraignment in the morning. Dalton lied in a tone that expected agreement. "If you cooperate." "In our world," Dominique said, "paperwork is what hangs men like you." Silence showed its teeth. Dalton's baton tapped the counter once, twice, like a man checking whether wood could feel fear. He jerked his chin toward the lockup. "Cells." The corridor swallowed voice. Cinder block painted the color of regret. Bleach had tried. Something darker had stayed. The camera above the bars kept its red eye bright for show. Scratches on the lens looked like someone had tried to erase the past with keys. "Ladies first," Kyle said, swinging open the nearest door. The hinges squealed a sound like metal. Remembering pressure, he shoved Dominique inside without uncuffing her. She balanced the fall into a wall and turned the hit into stillness. Across the aisle, another cell yawned. Danielle stepped in under her own power and faced her sister through squared steel. The bars made a harp. Men like to play. "I want my phone call," Dominique said. She placed the words one at a time. "You got no rights here," Dalton answered pleasantly. As if reciting a menu, he glanced up at the dead lens and back. "Log them. Separate," he told Porter. Footsteps different in size and salary approached. The air cooled a degree without moving. Chief Darnell Holt filled the corridor and made it smaller. Silver hair exactly combed, tie a deeper blue than rules require. Smile trained to suggest cooperation while withholding it. "Evening," he said, voice tuned to television. He picked up the intake sheet and read as if it were a lighting plot. "A lot of disrespect for one night." "Your men assaulted us," Dominique said, moving closer to the bars. "The metal was warm from other hands. Now they're pretending we asked for it." Holt walked like he was viewing art in a gallery dedicated to other people's mistakes. "Pretending is a strong word," he said mildly. He stopped at Danielle's door and looked at her like a puzzle whose solution bored him. "Sometimes the paperwork chooses its subjects. Sometimes subjects choose the paperwork. You understand you are detaining federal agents," Danielle said. "I understand I'm maintaining order." He nodded toward the red camera light. "We keep these on. People behave when they think they're watched." The lens reflected a pinprick in his eye. He turned to Dalton. "Process them," he said. "By the book." He let the word hang, then added, "Our book." He left a vacuum behind him that smelled faintly of cologne and threat. Heat crawled back into the corridor as if embarrassed. Time became cheap units. A wall clock with a second hand that skipped advanced itself slowly through numbers. Voices bled in from booking. A distant laugh, a printer jam cussing in a whisper. Somewhere, a drunk sang a verse about a dog in a truck and lost the melody. Later hours compounded into a stack, that tipped footsteps returned. Softer, quicker, lighter on the duty belt. Officer Jenny Morales appeared with a cart, 2 paper sacks balanced on foam cups. Her boots were new enough to squeak. Her badge looked like a question. Dark hair braided tight, eyes scanning corners, like corners kept diaries. "Dinner," she said for the air, "sandwich and chips." She slid a bag through Danielle's slot. Fingers brushed. Paper rasped. Something small and folded came with the weight of stale bread. Morales didn't look at it. She moved to Dominique's door and did the same. Voice level. Fountains down. Cups will have to do. Under the hum of uniforms and keys. Her words thinned to almost nothing. "Don't trust anyone here," she breathed. "This isn't the first time." Dominique's blink was slow enough to be nothing at all. "Thank you, officer." Morales adjusted her belt like it had given her trouble. Eyes flicked to the dead camera, then back. "Get some rest," she said for Porter's benefit, and pushed the cart away. The squeak faded. Danielle didn't unfold the paper right away because patience is also a tool. They ate what they had to, dry bread, and used salt. When Porter shuffled past, clipboard making a show of authority, she bent to scratch an ankle and palmed the note. Under a blanket thin as a bad promise, she opened it. One number, a name printed in small, neat letters, Deputy Director Marcus Chen, emergency. An extra line lower, tighter pencil. They do this once a month. Mostly black women. She tore the corner and put the numbers in her mouth, paper and graphite and grit. She chewed a rhythm for memory and swallowed the rest. The camera watched nothing with its red lie. "Play small," Danielle murmured, lips barely moving. "Let them think we broke. We collect." Dominique breathed, the syllables riding the vent's sigh. "Then we burn their book." Night found the building. Air cooled 2 degrees. The hum adjusted to a lower key. At some hour, the soft clink of glass and the sloppy rhythm of men with time to kill drew closer. Dalton's voice floated, bourbon-burnished. Kyle's giggle. A boy trying on menace. Mark's quiet heaviness. A mountain with a mouth. They settled near the desk, just out of sight. Their chairs squealed like a confession rehearsing itself. The bracelet of hours tightened. "Classic," Dalton said. "Performance whisper." "The Thompson kid." "Plant a bag." Judge nods. "Boom, off the streets." "God's work," Mark said, and there was a metallic pride under it. "Remember the teacher?" Kyle asked. "Bag in the desk." Boom. "License gone." Kids cry. "Not our problem." "Preventive maintenance," Dalton said, pleased with the phrase. Hattie, the night nurse, drifted by with a tray and a look that had seen too much. "Watch your hands," she told nobody, sliding a bottle of generic antacid between bodies. For 3 seconds, they did. Danielle lay on her bunk, eyes on the ceiling hairline that split one cinder block into 2 imperfect pieces. The tiny microphone sewn into her bra strap, overlooked because men like these assume threat lives, where they can see drank every word. She angled her shoulder as if rolling, pointing the seam of fabric toward the voices. Dominique watched their reflections in the polished steel toilet curve. 3 men, 1 bottle, the outline of a baton. Shadows moved when they said names. Judges, ADAs, a developer with a nephew on a council. She wrote an invisible ledger on the inside of her forearm with a fingernail. Dates, streets, words that would be needed later when someone asked, "What exactly happened?" And the town fell very quiet. Morales passed again, slower, a hand on her radio in a gesture of habit or fear. She let 4 heartbeats go by in front of Danielle's door, and 6 in front of Dominique's. Those little pauses held together like stitches. "You boys done?" Porter yawned from his stool. The crosswords smirked at him. He filled another square. None. Lockdown sweep. Dalton announced because power loves ceremony. Keys jangled. Boots hit concrete in double time. They came down the block, faces composed into competence. Rick stopped at Danielle's bars and looked in like a man checking that a fire is out. Danielle stared at the thin white vein in the cinder and let her breath be nothing. They moved on. Air returned. When the corridor emptied back into hum and the distant printer started again, Danielle shifted her shoulder and tapped the seam once, an old signal between them that meant, "We have it." Dominique let her head rest against cool metal for a count of 3, then lifted it. She met Danielle's eyes through squares and steel and built a bridge the length of a hallway. Dawn leaked in without color. The clock surprised itself with a new number. Morales reappeared with breakfast trays and a straighter spine. "Eat," she said for forms. Under it, "I can get you to a phone." 10-minute gap at shift change. Landline behind files. Blind corner. "Why?" Dominique asked. "Because you learn a person by the reason they give themselves." Morales swallowed and found the answer she had already picked. "Because I live here," she said, "and I'm tired of living here." Danielle nodded once. Terms agreed. Risks understood. Shift change announced itself the way machines do metal on metal. A cough. Not a cough. Doors closing with soft decisions. Somewhere. Coffee filters tore wrong. Hattie made a fuss at the front about a rash that might be disciplinary. Porter dropped a stack of forms like a man sabotaging himself by habit. Keys whispered at the cell doors. Morales' face stayed calm. "Maintenance," she said, louder than sense. "Camera check." The red dead eye pretended harder. Iron parted. Air moved. The corridor smelled, for one brief second, like paper that hadn't lied yet. Morales leaned in just enough for their shoulders to touch the idea of trust. 5 minutes, she whispered, and the words turned the hinge. Shift change came on soft shoes. Doors sighed. Buzzers hiccup. A mop bucket thumped like a muted drum. Morales moved first, face blank. Keys. Sure, swinging the bars. Just enough for air to feel different. Maintenance. She called down the corridor, like talking to no one in particular. Camera check. The red eye in the corner kept lying. She angled her shoulder between the sisters and the hallway, voice dropping to a temperature only they could feel. 5 minutes. Files room. Landline behind the green cabinet. "I'll make a spill." Danielle stepped out into the chill and the hum. Cuffs whispering against bone. Dominique followed, matching the tempo. Concrete cooled their feet through thin sole. Somewhere close. Toner coughed into plastic. They slid through the door marked Files beige metal, a label that remembered a different decade. Inside, rows of cabinets, and the scent of dust that had signed its name everywhere. A corkboard sagged with old memos and a holiday party photo where everyone smiled like they meant it last year. 2 minutes of eyes on the floor. Morales promised. Then vanished. A clatter rose from booking. Coffee exploding into forms. Voices snapping toward the mess. Danielle eased into the blind corner between a cabinet and the wall, the phone's cracked handset warm from the room. She dialed the number she had chewed into herself. 1 ring. 2. 3. "This is Keene. Flat. Familiar. Sir Agent Daniel Carter." Her breath sharpened. "We're being held at Holt County PD. We have live evidence of systemic—" "Stop," he said, and the word cut something. "Do not outline facts on an unsecured line. Chief Holt is implicated." She pressed. "Pattern include planting." I said stop. The tone moved from mentor to memo. "Holt is a cooperating partner. You are in a hostile jurisdiction with political sensitivities. You will not escalate." Dominique pressed closer, catching the room's thin cool and the phone's heat. The second hand on a wall clock clicked past a number it pretended to respect. With respect, Danielle said, keeping the calm she put on before doors open. We have audio of officers naming crimes. We need a federal hold. You need to stand down, Keene said. Accept a municipal citation if offered. Leave town. Let relationships manage relationships. Relationships. The word left a film. Dominique's mouth went dry. Her voice found gravel. Sir, we have names, judges, ADA schedules, a ledger of. I am giving you an order. Keene said, continue, and you will find yourselves without cover. Am I clear? The dial tone of silence held steady between them all. Yes, sir, Danielle said, because some doors close quieter if you let them. The line clicked dead, no hecho, no safety net. Morales reappeared, cheeks flushed with borrowed outrage from the spill. We have to move, she breathed. They'll check this hall in 30. They retraced steps through paper air. A stapler clicked from somewhere like distant gunfire. Back at the cells, Mark's laugh came first lazy, heavy, followed by Dalton's voice, pleased with a joke. Only he heard. They barely got inside before Boots turned the corner. Rick filled the aisle like smoke. He held up a phone so its light became a weapon. Well, he said, grin slow as syrup. Your boss sends his regards. He showed the message, not long enough to read, long enough to sting. Told me you girls are a handful. Says we should take our time. Dominique's hands hit the bars. The clang ran the corridor like spilled silver. Step closer, she said. Say it again. Rick laughed the way a man laughs when he thinks the room belongs to him. Nobody's coming. Agent. No cavalry. No god from the machine. Just local hospitality. He tapped the bars with his baton. The sound nested in old paint. Sleep tight, he added, and walked on with the satisfied rhythm of a man leaving a match by curtains. Morales lingered one extra beat. Her eyes said I heard it too. Her footsteps said she still had a job. Silence grew edges. Danielle pressed her forehead to cold steel and watched the hairline crack trace the cinder block like a thought that wouldn't abandon itself. Dominique found the same vein from her angle, a seam stitched through separate walls. He's in it, Dominique said. No rank, no title. Keene had fallen out of noun, or in debt to it, Danielle said. Different leash, same hand. What now? The question tasted like copper. She already knew the shape of the answer. She needed to hear it drawn. Not up? Danielle said. Out. She breathed once, twice, measured, lateral lines. People who don't owe him dinners or weekends at the lake. Redundancy. Nothing in one place. Morales. Luis, a judge who still hates sleep, Dominique said, and a reporter who bites. Chain of custody, Danielle added, because building cases is an art and a trap. We turn whispers into documents, documents into weight. Time resumed. Doors banged. Somewhere, a printer found its groove and accepted its fate. The fluorescent over their block flickered and gave up, then came back in a weaker key. Hattie drifted past with a blood pressure cuff and a face that didn't ask permission. Vitals, she announced, stepping into Danielle's cell. Fingers cool. Cuff hissing. Her mouth barely moved. They drink around 3, she murmured. Bourbon in styrofoam. Communion, she said, and tightened just enough to be felt. You hear better when men forget their tongues. She pivoted to Dominique. Squeeze. The needle bounced. You didn't hear that? Didn't hear what? Dominique asked, a play they'd already rehearsed. Hattie's eyes said good. She took her tray and left a bottle of antacid on Porter's desk, like a bribe to indigestion. Hours turned sticky. A siren wailed into the distance, thin as a lie. Rick's laughter returned, seasoned with whiskey and victory. Kyle's boots scuffed anxious patterns. Mark's chair complained in long vowels. The wrist mic sewn into Danielle's bra strap warmed against skin, as if remembering its job. Morales slid by, slower, a paper tucked under her clipboard. As she passed Danielle's slot, the edge of a hospital bracelet caught on steel and stayed. Clear plastic, a thin metallic seam, like a throat in miniature. Danielle palmed it. Morales never broke stride. Medical inventory, she said aloud, to nobody. She kept walking, shoulders telling the rest. The bracelet lay light as breath in Danielle's palm. Tiny embossed numbers on the strip, 2 raised dots near the clasp. Bird or snake, Dominique whispered. Throat, Danielle whispered back, and tapped twice. A tick crawled her wrist. Heat hum. Directional. She lifted her forearm toward the corridor, casual, like stretching a cuff that bit, and felt the small device listen with purpose. Down the hall, chairs dragged, paper thumped. Rick's voice grew the oily patina of a sermon. To order, he intoned, to reminding folks where they belong. Kyle giggled into his cup. To bosses who tell us to take our time, God bless the chain of command. Mark added, not even trying for irony. Danielle nudged her elbow a hair toward the opening. Dominique rolled her shoulder into alignment, 2 mics triangulating a room men thought was safe. Sound braided itself along the cinder, crawling toward the seam like water. You know what I love, Rick said. When they apologize, all that attitude turns to yes, sir. It's like watching a storm realize it's a puddle. Preventive maintenance, Mark said again, stroking the phrase like a pet. Thompson boy, Kyle chimed, mama crying buckets. 5 years. Cleans the block. Property. Seichers. A gift. Rick said, you draw a line on a map and a coffee shop shows up. Paper rustled. A pen tapped in a rhythm that would help later. Hattie's shoes appeared at the edge of the frame. Danielle could see practical, scuffed, stubborn. Watch your backs, she told them without a smile. We're family, Rick said. Family ruins you, Hattie said, and moved on. Danielle's fingers tingled with the urge to close into fists. She flexed them into patience. The bracelet hummed quiet approval. She pictured the waveforms, the syllables flaring when guilt got excited. She pictured Maya Green's recorder, soaking them up later like a desert getting rain. She pictured Judge Wilkes's ledger finally finding something heavier than ink. Footsteps approached the cells. The 3 men performed their competence. Keys chiming, flashlights clicking. Rick stopped at Danielle's bars again. The cut on his forehead held a new shade. He wore it like a conversation starter. How's our royalty? He asked, as if the day hadn't taught him new language. Danielle studied the cinder crack and let it answer. Dominique shifted a half-inch their tell, for we have it. Ricklinge. Maybe he felt the room's angle change. Pride told him it hadn't. He moved on. Danielle tapped once on the bracelet. The hum settled. She slid it under her sleeve like contraband hope and leaned back against the bunk. You still with me? Dominique asked, not looking. Still, Danielle said. The clock oozed toward a number that meant sunrise might consider forgiving the town. The hum under everything chose a lower key. Morales appeared once more. Tray empty. Eyes bright. With a private decision. She looked at them both and didn't speak. You save some words for when they'll do the most damage. A door opened somewhere near the front. New voices. New shoes. A calm that wasn't local. The building held a breath. Tonight, Danielle said, as if planning a bridge repair, we go wide. Dominique nodded into the metal that had held her long enough to learn her pulse. And when it breaks, we let it leave a mark. Danielle said, eye on the thin, white vein that made the wall honest. They slept in pieces, not quite rest, not quite dream, counting the hums between footsteps. Outside, the river under the bridge kept its own measure, moving even when nobody watched. Inside, a bracelet cool, a phone number sat in a stomach. and two sisters matched their breathing to the only metronome that had never lied. Morning arrived by vent recycled, cool, drifting through bleach and coffee. The institutional weather that flattens every day into the same day. Keys clinked. A radio clicked through country static, and the fluorescent above the interview rooms buzzed in a tired falsetto. Morales wheeled a cart with two foam cups and an expression no one ever wrote in reports. Interview. Porter called, lifting a clipboard like it weighed justice. He didn't look up. They walked the narrow hall past scuffed paint and framed posters about professionalism curling at the corners. The room waited with a bolted table, two metal chairs, and a plastic camera eye that pretended to watch. A two-way mirror held the shape of men who liked to stand behind glass. Maya Green stepped in on small heels that announced their own authority. Blue blazer, notebook scarred by use, recorder the size of a candy bar. The bruise at her cheekbone had mostly faded. The defiance had not. "Ladies," she said. Somewhere between courtesy and urgency, Rick lounged in the doorway. Coffee, steaming like fresh arrogance. "Keep it tight," he told Maya without looking at them. "They're sensitive." Maya adjusted her mic. "I've interviewed senators with food poisoning," she said. "I can handle sensitive." He smiled around his cup and stayed to supervise. A shadow that breathed. The recorder's red light blinked on, then steadied. "State your names." Maya said, "Danielle Carter, Dominique Carter." "Occupation." "Federal agents." Rick's coffee paused midair. He didn't hide the smirk. "Allegations say you were intoxicated and combative." Maya said, eyes on them, not him. "How do you respond?" Danielle let the silence set the table. "We were customers." Dominique angled a look at the fake camera. "We became evidence." Maya didn't write that down. She let it sit. "Proof?" she asked. "Bland on the surface. Current under it." "Under the neon," Dominique said, as if describing weather. "Above the shelf." "I see." Maya asked 5 useless questions about the special of the night and what time they arrived and who poured the drinks. She never looked at Rick. She let her recorder listen for the thing men think only rooms can hear. At 9 minutes, Porter's chin jutted toward the clock. "Bored." Maya capped her pen. "That's plenty," she said. Voice professional. For now, as they stood, her palm brushed the tabletop. A sticky note took 2 steps before deciding to stick there. A number. A place. Noon. Rick collected their borrowed time with a click of his tongue. "Lunch," he announced, like the end of a show. "See you girls after." Back in the block, Morales slid oatmeal through slots and wrong volume warnings through her breath. 12, she murmured, eyes nowhere near them. Luis shuts down to mop. Noon dragged its feet. The clock lost a minute, then found it again. Apologetics. Footsteps came and went. The bracelet lay cool against Danielle's skin. The crack in the cinder block stitched light so thin you had to want to see it. At 12:02, a back door 4 blocks away opened on the smell of old beer and lemon oil. Luis closed the shades, slid 3 deadbolts, and led Maya into the back room where a second-hand PC hummed like an old dog. The monitor filled with tiny squares of yesterday. He scrubbed to the moment, the neon bleeding color into faces. Daniela's flat. Dominique's shoulders squared. Rick's chair scraping a threat. The slap, the cuffs, it was all there. Wider than one memory, tighter than any excuse. Maya stood still until her breath found rhythm. "How long?" she asked. "Years," Luis said. "Cameras because some nights truth needs a witness that doesn't flinch." He handled the mouse like an instrument. "I hid the feeds, called it insurance. Insurance doesn't pay unless you lose something. Make copies," Maya said. 3. One stays with you. One goes to a man who remembers the law without selling it. One gets mailed out of state with a letter that opens only if you don't answer. Luis nodded, not surprised by the plan he had already half written in his head. A slid drives into ports. A progress bar crawled like a tired caterpillar. At 4, a bell over a side door chimed twice. Judge Clarence Wilkes opened his own lock and sized them both with eyes that had watched seasons of good intentions rot. He wore a tie, so old the pattern came back into style on accident. "Bring it," he said. Luis brought the footage. Maya brought a ledger of names that didn't fit on a napkin. The judge brought patience sharpened by regret. He watched the scene one frame at a time until the slap arrived. He closed his eyes like a man receiving communion he didn't believe in anymore. When he opened them, his jaw had found a new angle. "You'll need chain of custody," he said, moving to a legal pad that had grooves from notes too hard. "We make the first copy the master, log the handoffs, seal the envelope, photograph the seals. We build redundancies like scaffolding around a building they've been chewing at for years. Your house gets watched," Maya warned. "It always has," Wilkes said. He signed his name to the top of the pad with the slow penmanship of a man swearing on paper. "We go to the courthouse in the morning, emergency writ, and we don't wait for morning to start." They sat around a wooden table that had known arguments and birthdays. Afternoon turned to the kind of evening that tests locks. Luis told them how the officers stopped in for free beers and stories they thought dissolved in the air. Maya added the prosecutor who always used the word wayward like it explained everything. Wilkes mapped 40 cases into a shape hunters would recognize. A car idled outside not long. Then long enough, Wilkes didn't look out the window. He wrote a number on a recipe card and slid it across. "Text this when you have a feed," he said. "It wakes the right people." Back at the station, Morales pushed a broom at a speed that looked like laziness and was tactic. Hattie swapped out an IV bag for a man sleeping off a small apocalypse and hummed something that might have been a lullaby. Rick returned from lunch with barbecue sauce at the edge of his smile. "Good news," he announced down the corridor, rattling a blank form. "Backlog, you're our guests another night." He beamed like a host. The fluorescent above him flickered once. A tiny protest. 2 blocks over. Maya set her bag on a motel bed, locked the door, and built a cathedral of backups. Cloud, off-site drive, a friend's fridge, a burned DVD, slipped into the jacket of an old Christmas movie. She texted a string of numbers, then another, then one word. Soon, night gathered like a jury. The bracelet warmed at 2:30, when bourbon loosened tongues back at booking. Names spilled into air already caught. Across town, Wilkes signed a draft injunction with his good pen and his worse handwriting and called a clerk who owed him nothing but respect. Just before 3, a pair of headlights drifted by the bar's dark windows, slowed, moved on. Luis sat at the back table with a baseball bat he had borrowed from himself at age 12. He didn't need it. He needed to know he had it. At dawn, the courthouse steps were washed by a man with a hose, who watched the water pool and decided where it would go. By 9, the Attorney General's office had an email marked urgent, with an attachment that opened on a slap and didn't stop there. At 10, a black sedan pulled into a parking lot where the paint had surrendered to sun. 2 troopers and a woman in plain clothes got out. Morales waited by the door with a clipboard and a pulse you could have set a metronome to. "Captain Reeves," she said into her phone as she watched the sedan enter the bay. "We need to talk warrants." Inside, the building changed key. Reeves straightened his collar pins and his posture, the sound of ambition tuning itself. He looked at the writ and saw not just ink, but future. He told himself he could steer this. He told himself he had always been a man of rules. Temporary transfer. He announced to no one and everyone, voice brave enough to believe itself. He sent a text Rick didn't see. He opened a door Mark didn't expect. He looked at Morales and found an ally he hadn't earned. In the cage, Danielle felt the pressure shift the way you feel. Weather through old scars, Dominique heard boots organize themselves into something like purpose. The hum above them steadied. Today, Danielle said, more breath than word. Today, Dominique answered, and the thin vein in the cinder block took the new light without breaking. They were led down a hall that smelled like old soap and fresh plans. The bay door groaned halfway up. Outside, the day burned honest. Morales stood with troopers and a clipboard that could cut. Behind her. In the back seat of a sedan, a phone stared from a propped case lens unblinking. Red light patient. Captain, Morales said, service of writ. Reeves squinted at the seal, at the signatures, at his reflection in the glass door. He nodded once. The smallest surrender. We will comply. Rick stepped into the rectangle of sun, jaw tight. He looked at the clipboard, then the phone, then the sisters. Something in his face cracked in a place the camera would catch. Good, Dominique said softly. For no one who would admit to hearing, let's show them how truth looks under light. No hero music, no miracle, just a bay door ticking into place and a town leaning in. Phones lifted, breath held like a rope being pulled in the same direction. The hum in the ceiling found a steadier pitch. The bracelet warmed and stayed that way, and the crack along the cinder block thin, stubborn, unchanged, caught the sun and turned it into a seam that asked to be followed. Municipal storage looked like the county's attic steel ribs. Concrete floor, dust that turned light into weather. A skylight ran a crooked blue vein overhead, where a crack had been repaired with resin that never forgot. The smell was cardboard and toner, and old policy. Someone had rolled 2 chain-link cages to the center as if making a pen for facts. Temporary staging, Captain Reeves said, tour guide calm that didn't reach his eyes. He motioned to the tech wheeling a county laptop with a warped lid and a webcam shutter stuck in a permanent wink. We'll process here. Keep it controlled. Morales and 2 troopers held the loading ramp like a shoreline. Judge Wilkes stood by a stack of copy paper with a manila envelope and the posture of consequence. Maya waited near a folding table, pale under concealer, sling tight against her ribs, a phone cupped like a second pulse. Cuffs, Reeves told Hayward. Inside the enclosure, the chain-link door groaned, then closed with a performance-ready clack. Danielle stepped into the cage first, Dominique after, wrists forward, so the camera could see restraint without stage directions. Rick leaned on the fencing with the lazy entitlement of a man who mistakes hardware for history. Welcome to central casting, he said, grinning. Villains. Victims pick your mark. Your line is under oath, Danielle said, voice flat as a form. Reeves opened a folder already half filled with lies that preferred to be called allegations. He read charges as if the act made them true, eyes flicking to the camera eye and back to the paper. For the record, names. Agent Daniel Carter, Danielle said. Age Dominique Carter, Dominique said. Maya lifted her phone a fraction. The red indicator on her external mic glowed steady. Wilkes unfolded the injunction and slid it onto a clipboard labeled with the case number in his tight, old-school hand. We're live to the chain of custody, he said, not raising his voice. Master copy remains sealed with this court. Additional copies logged and mirrored. Captain, please turn the laptop's feed toward the defendants. If we have to litigate later, I'd like the angle to be clean. The tech obeyed, rolling the cart so the webcam looked through mesh at faces and hands. He tapped a key. The screen blinked to a familiar interface. A notification popped, then flickered away. In the top corner, a streaming window opened itself like a habit. Tima's stamp, viewer count, comments, ribboning. Who authorized Reeves started. Maya's good eyebrow lifted. Sunlight, she said. Morales didn't look away from the door. The troopers didn't shift. Hayward's jaw clenched and unclenched like a decision being whittled. Proceed. Wilkes said. Reeves cleared his throat. Agents Carter, you're being held on paper that will not survive scrutiny, Danielle said. We have recorded confessions of conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Multiple counts. We will provide those recordings under seal to your evidence clerk, with signatures at each handoff. You don't get to run the room, Rick said, chain link humming under his palm. This is my county. Then speak to your county, Dominique said, eyes on the black glass of the camera. Explain your rules. Rick's smile tightened. He looked into the lens and saw himself. He straightened like men do when mirrors are present. Folks forget where they live. He began, we remind them, that's the job. Keep street kid. Keep businesses open. When people test fences, you push them back. Simple. Maya's thumb barely moved on her phone. Viewer numbers ticked, turned, climbed. A comment floated. We see you. You plant evidence, Dominique said. Nobody plants anything. Rick said too fast. We find what they bring on themselves. Teacher's desk, Danielle said. Unregistered gun under a grandma's sink. The Maple Street signature. Preventive maintenance. Mark muttered, then looked at his shoes as if they'd spoken. Reeves shot him a warning glare. The tech swallowed hard and tapped the trackpad a nervous rhythm. The webcam indicator burned red, a persistent record of present tense. Captain, Wilkes said, gentle as a reprimand can be. You'll want to advise Sergeant Dalton of his rights before he says anything else that helps our case. Reeves hesitated the length of a career, then began. Sergeant Dalton, you have the right to remain. Rick laughed over the words. You act like paper has teeth, he said. He turned to Danielle and let the venom find the old groove. You think those badges? Souvenirs belong to survivors, she said, and the comment ribbon erupted. Morales's radio crackled once. Discreet. Her fingers brushed the volume, a tick down. The trooper nearest the ramp adjusted his stance and looked like infrastructure. You want truths, Rick said, feeling the slope and mistaking it for control. Truth is, streets were clean before your kind got uppity. Truth is, we kept the peace. The chief understood. The judges understood. Hell, your own supervisor. Reeves raised a hand, too late to stop inertia. Sergeant, he warned, told us to take our time. The room went a half-degree colder. On the screen, hearts and expletives scrolled like weather. Maya didn't blink. Wilkes said nothing and wrote a single word in his margin. Corroboration. Enough. Reeves said, Sergeant Dalton, step back from the enclosure. Rick grabbed the chain link, rattled it until the old weld sang, Make me, he said. The teenage dare he never outgrew. He reached for the cart. The laptop rocked. The webcam skewed. The feed caught his face at an angle he hadn't rehearsed. His hand found a can clipped under the shelf department issue OC spray. He yanked it free with a satisfied grunt. Don't, Hayward said. Too late. Rick depressed the trigger. Orange mist hit mesh. Atomized. Blew back into his own eye. He screamed a raw vowel and flailed. Can clattering against concrete. The spray found Mark's cheek. He cursed and stumbled. The laptop's power cord snagged under Rick's boot and snapped. The screen went dark. The drone at the skylight silent. Small. A gnat with a gaze tilted its lens and kept watching through tempered glass. Self-destruction rarely looks noble. It looks like this. Get his hands. Reeves said to no one and everyone. Morales moved first, smooth and quick, forearm at Rick's wrist, body turning him like a page. A trooper took the other arm. Hayward stepped in without thinking too long and did the part of his job that made sense again. Cuffs spoke in the language of metal. Clark fumbled, recovered, secured Mark, with a breath that sounded like relief or grief. Wilkes stepped closer to the mesh. Sergeant Dalton, you are under arrest for kidnapping, assault, conspiracy, and deprivation of rights under color of law, he said, diction clean as evidence. Captain, you'll book him under Title 18, Section 242, and log all use of force incidents contemporaneously. We'll want his phone. We'll want his reports. Seal his locker. Photograph everything before you move anything. Reeves nodded, as if the directives had fallen from his own head. He realized his hands had been idle, and found things for them to do. Collect his service weapon, he ordered. Separate transport, medical check, full Miranda, recorded. Maya stepped to the edge of the cage, breath rough but steady. She held up her phone so Danielle and Dominique could see the numbers, 5 digits and climbing. You're live on 3 outlets, she said. 2 national desks are in the comments. Don't waste a sentence. Danielle lifted her cuffed hands into frame, not theatrically, just so there would be no argument later about how men with guns treat women with hands behind their backs. To anyone watching who thinks this is an exception, she said, check your town. Listen for the hum. Find the crack. Dominique looked up at the skylight where the resin line caught light like a stitch. Strong things remember pressure, she said. That's how you know where to push back. Reeves found keys. He opened the chain link and didn't pretend it was mercy. Agents, he said, the word finally landing where it belonged. You're coming with us to sign statements and upload evidence. We'll coordinate with the AG's office for warrants on lockers and devices. Judge, we'll need your clerk. You'll have her, Wilkes said. He slid the sealed drive into a clear bag, initialed the tape, and wrote the time with the slow care of an oath. And you'll follow chain of custody like it's scripture. Rick muttered into the concrete about towns and kings and rules no longer interested in him. The spray still burned his eyes. No one handed him water. Clark read him Miranda a second time, with the stubbornness of a man making up for lateness. Hayward stood by, with his palms open at his sides, suddenly without a script and relieved. Morales glanced at Danielle. Still here? She asked under the noise. Still here? Danielle said. They walked out into a morning that had decided to be bright on purpose. The ramp creaked. Paperwork began to breed. On the screen in Maya's hand, the viewer count steadied, then spiked as a new clip cued the bar's neon, the slap, the cuffs. 2 feeds braided into one story with more rooms ahead. Outside, Sirens stayed far away, respectful for once. The town's air tasted like cooled tin and coffee grounds, and the first page of Something Honest, behind them, the skylight's mended crack held a thin white seam writing blue. It didn't need to disappear to mean the problem was fixed. It needed to be remembered, so no one forgot where the pressure had been and where it could return. The county annex woke like a machine that had remembered its purpose. Lights flicked from hum to glare. Copy rooms exhaled paper dust. A clerk wheeled out a cart stacked with manila envelopes and tamper-evident bags, each with a lot number printed like a heartbeat across the seal. Evidence intake is down the hall, Captain Reeves said, already in motion, already on the right side of the line he'd been straddling. We'll log the drives, the spray can, the laptop. Chain of custody doesn't bend. Not today. He didn't wait to see if the sisters followed. He knew they would. Danielle and Dominique matched stride, wrists bearing the faint bracelets of metal that had been removed but not forgotten. The corridor smelled of lemon cleaner over old coffee. A a truce that favored neither. At the doorway marked property. An evidence tech with gray hair and a precise part looked up like a judge. Name, he asked. Caldwell. Reeves answered. Documented observers. Judge Wilkes. Reeves said, tipping a nod, as he staunted A.G. Stone. Investigator Morales. The tech pulled out a ledger the size of a family Bible and opened to a fresh page. Items, he said. Wilkes set the sealed drive on the stainless counter. One portable solid-state drive. Serialized. Sealed by the court. Contains video from the municipal storage incident and associated bar recordings. He pointed to each piece of text as he read, as if the letters themselves appreciated the respect. Maya leaned against the doorjamb, filming hands and bags, angles and time stamps. The sling pressed new creases into her blazer. The bruising on her cheek had settled into a stubborn yellow map. She didn't ask questions. She captured answers before anyone could think to rearrange them. Morales placed a labeled canister beside the drive. One OC container, department issue, discharged. One laptop, county property, power cable severed. Both recovered at scene. The tech photographed each item from 3 angles, then again with a ruler for scale, then again with today's paper in frame. He wrote the time down to the minute. He slid the log across, inviting signatures with a pen tethered by chain. Names printed. He said, legible. Danielle signed. Dominique signed. Reeves signed with a pressure that could have carved granite. The ink lines looked like a new kind of oath. Statements, the assistant AG said, appearing as if peeled from a statute. She wore flats, and the patience of someone who had argued with men whose names were on buildings. We'll take initial sworn accounts now, then supplement this afternoon. They moved to a conference room that hadn't been used for anything consequential in years. The walls were an optimistic beige. A clock ticked too loud. Someone had tacked up a cartoon about paperwork that wasn't funny anymore. A court reporter set up a stenotype and adjusted her foot pedal. She didn't introduce herself. She lifted her chin like a swimmer before a cold pool. Full legal names, the AG said, pressing record on a tabletop device that printed a red dot into the air. Spellings. Then tell it like we will have to tell it again in 10 different rooms. Danielle spoke in units that fit on the page. She placed the slap, the cuffs, the threats. She placed the hum that never stopped, the camera whose light never burned, the way a bottle sounded when men with power got talkative. She placed the bracelet mic as an afterthought to the image, Hattie's tin, Morales keys, the trick of pointing your own forearm like a quiet mouth. Dominique caught the rests. The pauses that carried weight, she filled them with small details that juries believe stickiness on the bar floor, the way a chair sounds when grief lifts it, the sting in the nose when OC rebounds off chain link and finds the man who launched it. The reporter's fingers danced. The room's clock bothered nobody. Somewhere, a copier misfed, and men who'd never be quoted swore softly and fixed it. Last question. The AG said, you understand you'll be witnesses and complainants. You understand the personal cost. Danielle glanced at Dominique and found the same small smile she'd seen in a patrol car window. We understand we live here, she said. A deputy stuck his head in. Captain, he said to Reeves, throat tight with official news. Booking has imprinting now. State wants a press availability in an hour. The chief's office is sealed. Good. The AG answered without moving. Hold the line. They stepped back into a hallway, now full of traffic. Boxes rolled past labeled Locker Dalton, files, civil, evidence seized. Each one had a chain of initials down the side like an ancestry. On the way to the front, they passed a glassed-in space where a young officer sat at a desk and stared at his hands. Hayward looked up once. Morales posed, then kept moving. There would be time later for the ones who had decided to change the shape of themselves. Outside, the sun had scaled the courthouse dome and made a bright coin of it. The square had filled with cameras and community in the same ratio. Vendors improvised coffee. Church ladies arrived with boxed donuts and a strategy. People who'd watched the stream on cracked phones now held those phones up like citations of fact. The Attorney General stepped to a portable mic and made government words sound like somebody might answer for something. Affidavits obtained, they said. Warrants executed. Cases under review. A civil rights unit established here. Not across the river, not 3 counties away. Questions scissored upward. The AG fielded what could be fielded and ignored bait that had been thrown before breakfast. When a reporter asked about bad apples, the AG stared at the man until he read the answer written in that silence. Orchards. Wilkes announced a docket schedule for petitions to vacate. No drama. Just dates. An older woman in the crowd pressed both hands to her mouth and did not cry until she had written something in a notebook she'd carried for years. A black SUV with federal plates nosed to the curb and stayed respectful. 2 agents from Internal Affairs emerged with folders and faces that promised procedure. They didn't look at the crowd. They climbed the steps with the gravity that follows long careers. Danielle watched them pass without comment. Dominique watched the way their shoes creased leather and made a note she didn't need. Sign here, Reeves told a marshal at the door, handing over a sealed packet. And here, the marshals signed. Time stamped with a metal clunk. Paper made its own music when it had backbone. Maya drifted to the sisters with a micro-recorder tucked into her sling. I'm told I should rest, she said. Voice rough, grin intact. I had a better idea. You look awful, Dominique said softly. Good TV, Maya said. Do you have 10 words for the 6 o'clock that don't become a shirt? Danielle glanced over the square. Luis was handing cafecito to a deputy who had once ticketed him for a brake light that worked. Morales was talking to a grandmother like they'd known each other before all this. The dome reflected clouds that were trying to be rain. Strong things remember pressure, Danielle said. We remember where to push back. Maya nodded, wrote it down without overloving it, and limped away to feed a beast that sometimes paid out justice by accident. By lunch, a table inside the courthouse had become a triage for history. People signed in, set down envelopes, pushed forward photographs and receipts, appointment cards and texts. A retired teacher unfolded a copy of a letter she'd written to the school board 3 years ago and pointed to names that nobody had returned. A teenager with a cautious mustache held a citation up like a mirror. Someone snapped a photo, then another with a scale and a notebook backing it for dignity. Dominique moved among them with a legal pad and a pocket full of pens that didn't skip. She didn't wear her badge. She didn't need to. Danielle stood a few feet away at a map pinned to a corkboard, sliding markers into intersections where stories crossed. Liberty, Maple, Grant. A red line connected last night's warehouse to a kitchen window on Oak, where a woman had watched a patrol car sit too long for too many nights. In a side hallway, Morales found Hayward again. He was still at the desk, still looking at his hands. You either tell it now, she said, resting her back against the opposite wall, or you tell it when it costs more. He looked up, swallowed, nodded. Where do I start? At the report you rewrote, she said, then the one you refused. He exhaled like someone stepping into a river and stood. Late afternoon put a dull shine on the river through the courthouse windows. Paperwork had multiplied into stacks that could hold doors open, or shut them if someone stopped paying attention. Reeves moved pages from one table to another with the haunted efficiency of a man who knew how quickly a day can turn back into the old kind. Upload complete. The evidence, tech said from the door, holding a printed checksum like proof of life. Master file verified. Mirrors seated to 3 locations. Clerk has the keys. Say it again, Wilkes told him. The tech repeated the words exactly. Everyone in earshot felt the weight change in the room. When the square began to empty, when the TV trucks turned down their generators a notch, when the church ladies packed out the last of the donuts with the economy of veterans, Danielle stepped away to the edge of the lawn where the courthouse cast deep shade. Dominique joined her. They let their shoulders touch long enough to remember how that worked. Across the street, a city crew rolled a ladder from a truck that said, "Glass and glazing." A man in a baseball cap climbed to a second-story window and ran a finger along a hairline in the pane. He nodded, pulled a tube of resin from his belt, and set about mending something he hadn't broken. Sunlight hit the line and made it gleam like a thread through blue. "Still here?" Morales asked as she passed, a paper cup of bad coffee in each hand. "Still here," Danielle said. They didn't cheer, they didn't pose. They watched a man fix a thin, wandering fracture one careful beat at a time, and let the cooling afternoon lay a quiet over the square that felt, for once, like possibility rather than hush. By midweek, the town had learned a new sound, the shuffle of paper turning into action. The community hall, last used for church potlucks and graduation banquets, now hummed like a throat clearing before testimony. Folding tables stood in rows under buzzing lights, each with a handwritten placard, affidavit intake, evidence scan, witness liaison, coffee steamed in cardboard urns. Old wood carried lemon, oil, and ink, and the air wore the nervous warmth of people who hadn't expected to be believed. Danielle stood behind a map taped to a rolling whiteboard, pinning a blue flag on a corner of Liberty and Fry. "Same patrol car." 3 nights a week, the woman said, leaning on her cane like it had an opinion, sat there with lights off. "My grandson stopped walking that way." Her voice was steady, the way steel remembers heat. "Thank you," Danielle said. She wrote the plate number on a sticky note, matched it to a time frame, slid it into a ledger. Systems need clean entries. She could feel the hum in the vents' fluorescence and old HVAC settling into that tired B-flat the town knew too well. Different room, same key. She pressed another pin. Across the room, Dominique listened to a man in a denim jacket whose hands shook as if remembering cuffs. He pushed a cellophane bag across the table. Inside, a bent receipt, torn envelope, photo of a gun that hadn't belonged in a linen closet. "I kept everything, even when my sister told me it would make me crazy." He said, "Crazy's not the same as wrong." "It's not," Dominique said. She didn't touch his hands. She put the bag in a plastic sleeve with a tamper label and wrote today's date, careful as prayer. Chain of custody doesn't ask for faith, but it respects rituals. Morales moved the length of the room with a clipboard tucked into her elbow, her hair pulled back into something that meant business, and survived it. She stopped where Hayward stood near the doorway, suit too new for his posture. He kept smoothing his tie like apology could be ironed flat. "You came," she said, "neither warm nor cold." He nodded like a man stepping onto ice and trusting physics. "I made copies," he said, lifting a cheap thumb drive in a small bag. "A report I was told to rewrite, the before and the after. My initials are on both versions." "Good," Morales said. "You'll swear to the differences. And the reasons, sit with Wilkes first. He likes precise regret." In a corner, Judge Wilkes had turned a standing coat rack into a flagpole for forms. He adjusted his glasses and gave Hayward the chair that didn't wobble. "Name for the record," he said, pen ready. Officer former even Hayward. Hayward said, badge 0654. I knew when it went wrong. That happens earlier than men admit, Wilkes said. He wrote without looking away. Tell me where the policy ends and the habit begins. A young public defender wheeled in a dolly of boxes, eyes hollowed by too many pleas. These are my people, she said, parking the stack with the relief of surrender. If you vacate, vacate clean. Don't hand them another maze. We're cutting walls, Dominique said, sliding a chair toward her. Sit. Start with 3 names that keep you up. Under the clock, Maya had made a nest. Recorder. Phone. Legal pad with worn edges. A palm-sized camera perched on a stack of case law, like a bird on a fence. Her sling was gone. The bruise mapped a Van Gogh yellow down one cheek. We're not broadcasting, she told an elderly man whose distrust had outlived 2 administrations. We're preserving. Broadcast is for spectacle. This is for proof. He nodded slowly, then faster. The way trust comes back like circulation. After lunch, the AG's liaison Stone, hair in an unbothered bun, flats that meant business clapped once, just loud enough to retune the room. Status, she said, and people gave it in simple sentences. Drives mirrored, sworn statements logged, evidence sealed and scanned. A spreadsheet was projected onto the far wall, numbers blooming in rows. It looked like harvest. Danielle stepped outside for air she didn't owe anyone. The sky had thinned into a pale sheet. High cloud flattened sound. Across the street, a city glazier kneeled at a storefront window, his tool bright against glass. He traced a hairline crack with resin, bead by bead, and the line shone briefly before it learned to hide again. She watched his hands steady. Clean pressure at the right angle, and felt something loosen at the base of her skull. Still at it, a voice said. Keene stood 5 yards away, flanked by 2 internal affairs agents who wore government the way suits wear starch. He looked smaller without his office behind him, smaller still with his tie half a notch off. Danielle kept her eyes on the glazier. I came to coordinate records, Keene said, as if the sentence could rebuild a bridge he'd burned with a signature. I can facilitate. Dominique pushed open the hall door with her shoulder, a file pressed to her chest. We have facilitators, she said, and tilted her head toward Stone, toward Wilkes, toward a line of residents whose faces could break a room. You can be useful or quiet. He tried on contrition and found it tight. I misused, he said. You shows, Danielle said, and we recorded the choice. One of the agents coughed, a small reminder that this wasn't the time or place for absolution. They guided him up the steps with the politeness you give people who have enough rope. A few in the crowd recognized him and did not applaud. Back inside, the afternoon flexed its institutional muscles. The stenographer shifted chairs and plugged in a fresh foot pedal. Next, she called. A woman with a church hat sat and squared her shoulders. Morales leaned into the doorway of a storage closet turned witness room, where Hayward drank water like it might argue, you can still walk, she said. You don't have to crawl forever. He looked up, eyes reddened at the rims. I thought if I stayed quiet, I could fix small things. But the small things kept getting bigger. That's how rot worked, she said. Now tell it under oath. Did. Dates. Names. Edits in reports that turned citizens into perpetrators with a swap of adjectives. He pointed to a paragraph that had been cut, and to the memo that said, why. He read both out loud, his voice steadying as he listened to himself tell the truth. At 5, the hall shifted into something softer. Church ladies laid out foil pans of baked ziti, the smell of basil and tomato sauce, shouldering past toner and fear. A man whose brother was on the vacate list tuned a guitar in the corner until it stopped arguing with the air. Luis rolled in with a metal urn and announced, "Coffee's on until I run out, or the power grid begs." Dominique lifted a tray and nearly bumped Maya, who was mid-scribble, tongue caught in the corner of her mouth, like a kid doing math. "You're supposed to be home," Dominique said. "I am," Maya said, tapping her notebook. "Where the story is? Besides, Hattie threatened me with broth. That's worse than men with bats." They grinned like people who've survived something won't fit into a sentence. When evening cooled the windows to mirrors, Stone banged a serving spoon against a tray. "Quick sit rep," she said. "Judge Wilkes has set the first petitions to vacate for 9A.M. tomorrow. We'll focus on cases with corroborated fabrication. Public defender triage has prioritized 13. The evidence room has verified checksums and stored the primary chain at 3 sites, 1 out of county. Threats. Someone asked. "We have trolls and noise." Stone said. "We have names. We have troopers on the door." "We proceed." Danielle felt the room take the words and make of them a plank, not a bridge yet, something to step on. Morales crossed to them, Hayward a pace behind. He held a dog-eared box lid tight to his chest. "The way people hold babies and mistakes, I want to apologize," he said, not looking for an out. "To you both, for what I thought I could ignore." "Don't give us sorry," Dominique said. "Give the court your memory and the reasons you didn't use it earlier. That's how we keep this from happening again." He nodded, grateful for an answer that didn't bless him. Just before 9, an older man in a uniform that had seen parades set a TV on a wheeled stand and turned the dial to the local station, then the national. The lower third crawled with the town's name. Footage from the warehouse played the mesh. The yell, the spray rebounding into the wrong eyes. The Chiron read, "Civil Rights Review expands." In the corner of the screen, a live split showed a federal building where reporters waited for an indictment that had traveled across a fax and a hallway. Luis handed Danielle a cup, and for a moment the room fell under the quiet that arrives when people stand on the same floor. She found the hairline in the plaster above the stage, white on white, almost nothing, and smiled without meaning to. Stone's phone buzzed, the kind of buzz that changed the shape of a day. She read, lifted her head. "Keen pled," she said simply. "Conspiracy to obstruct, cooperation to follow." No one cheered. A murmur rolled, relief mixed with the complicated taste of too late truth. The guitar in the corner found a chord and let it hang. Outside, the glazier across the street packed his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. The resin line no longer shone. It was there, and not exactly as repaired things should be. He looked up, met Danielle's eyes through the glass, and tipped his cap once. She returned the nod. Night settled like a cool hand. The hall emptied in waves, babies on shoulders, men walking with women who carried the paperwork like it was finally lighter. The hum in the vents softened. The clock over the stage ticked a fraction out of sync as if learning a new time signature. Danielle capped a marker and pushed pins all the way into their intersections. Dominique stacked forms and put a stone from the lunchbox on the top page to keep it flat. Morales turned the open sign toward the street and left it off. "Tomorrow," Dominique said. "Tomorrow," Danielle echoed. They stood a minute longer in the half-light, listening to that tired B-flat in the fixtures, to the gelatinous quiet of a building catching its breath, to the small, unshowy sound of a crack in the paint taking the cool without complaint. Then they shut off the lights and let the dark carry the room until morning. Morning came clean and clinical, the kind of light that leaves no corner uninspected. The courthouse smelled like old varnish and copy toner, and the security arch beeped with the weary patience of someone who has heard every excuse. On the front steps, chalk signs from last night's gathering had survived the dew. Thin letters, hairline cracked where the stone was cracked, still legible. We believe our eyes. Inside, the docket board glowed a bureaucratic blue. 13 names queued beneath a header, petitions to vacate, each with a case number and a year that shouldn't have lasted as long as it had. A bailiff pinned the list straight, eyes meeting no one's. The hum overhead held its tired note. Danielle and Dominique stood in the second row of the gallery, suits simple, badges tucked away, paper heavy in their hand, not as weapons but as keys. Judge Wilkes took the bench at 9 sharp with a gavel that had seen ribbon cuttings and riots. He adjusted his glasses and glanced once to the gallery where Morales sat with a neat stack of sworn statements, where Hayward stared at his folded hands, where the public defender had circled dates in 3 colors to keep from drowning. "Good morning," Wilkes said. The microphone turned his voice into something rounder. "We'll proceed case by case, and we will get names right." The first petitioner walked stiffly to counsel table, gray cardigan, eyes like winter rivers. Her grandson took the chair beside her. The public defender stood. "Your Honor," she began, and the spell of rituals snapped into place. Exhibit tabs flipped. Certified copies were offered. A clerk rattled off foundation in a monotone trained to be invisible. Chain of custody documents sealed, signed, dated prior to sunup, were logged without fuss. The court reporter's keys talked to the air in quick, neat bursts, affidavits from 2 officers, corroborating the planted evidence, the defender said, passing up the bundle, plus audio authenticated by the state lab. Wilkes read a paragraph, another, then the half-page where the language turned from euphemism into names. He underlined something with the end of his pencil, looked to the woman in the cardigan, and let a breath out that reset the room. "Petition granted," he said. "The conviction is vacated, and the charge dismissed with prejudice. Record sealed. Counsel, prepare the order." The grandson didn't cheer. He put a hand on his grandmother's shoulder and nodded once, hard enough to dislodge a decade. In the back, someone exhaled a laugh that wasn't laughter. The second case moved faster. The third hung for a minute on a technical point, a date in an intake log. But the receipt from a pawn shop filled the hole like a brick. The fourth was the teacher. When the courtroom audio replayed the phrase preventive maintenance, it sounded uglier through good speakers. Wilkes closed his eyes and signed, "Between cases." A deputy rolled a cart up the aisle, a stainless steel thing with a top rack of creamers and a bottom rack of evidence boxes. He maneuvered it like he'd once driven patrol and still remembered the weight of corners. Luis appeared in the doorway with paper cups and the unstoppable smell of cinnamon. The bailiff gave him a look. Luis lifted the bag. The bailiff waved him in with 2 fingers, a tiny mercy that passed easily. At 10:30, the glass doors swung on the same hinge they always had, and a row of cameras leaned into the room's threshold. A producer in a blazer pointed at her watch, then the clock, then her feed. Maya raised a palm to the cameras without taking her earbud out. "Not here," she mouthed. Outside, they retreated, the doors sighed. The air remembered itself. When the docket reached the 9th name, a suit cut from the state capitol slid into the aisle seat. "Stone, today in black." Hair, a precise line. She passed a sticky note to the clerk, who passed it to Wilkes. He scanned it, rolled the pencil between his fingers, and nodded once. "We'll recess at noon," he said, "for a public update." He tapped the gavel once. A heartbeat. The courthouse steps filled like a basin. The Attorney General reached the portable lectern with a sheaf of pages and a face that would not try to make this pretty A battery-powered PA hissed and then cleared. "We have vacated 9 convictions this morning," the AG said. "More are under review. A special master has been appointed. The Civil Rights Division will maintain a permanent presence. While reforms are implemented," someone yelled. "Names, not hostile, hungry." The AG read them careful with syllables, careful with the years that followed. A young mother in the crowd put a hand to her mouth and crumpled into the arms of a woman in a church hat. A man lifted his chin towards sky and breathed like he'd been underwater too long. The cameras kept a respectful distance and still got their pictures. Dominique stepped to the side with stone, shielded by a pillar veined with stone cracks filled years ago. "We'll need officer deserts," Dominique said, voice flattened to fit task. "Not suspensions. Pull their certifications from the state." "Already started," Stone said. She ticked items off a legal pad without looking at it. "Evidence room audits. Suspension of the informant cash fund. Pretrial review panel with community seats. We won't fix trust with a press release." Down the steps, Morales handed a microphone to the community sound system, the same one used for parades. 2 minutes, she told Danielle. "Not more." Danielle took it and let the weight settle in her palm before she spoke. The crowd quieted the way crowds do when deciding to listen. "We're not here to bury anyone," she said. "We're here to dig up what they buried." She looked over heads to the river because it centered her. "If you have a paper, a memory, a question you were told not to ask, bring it. This is work, not a miracle." "Say that again." An old man called, smiling with half his mouth. "It's work," she said, and some people laughed because of course it was. The laugh wasn't light. It was strong. A black SUV eased to the curb where news vans had left exactly enough room. When the rear door opened, Keene stepped out, hands empty, face set to neutral. Agents trailed him like commas. He didn't approach the lectern. He found Danielle and stopped, where a person stops when they don't want to be mistaken for brave. "I signed," he said. "Not performing volume. I'm cooperating. That earns you consequences that fit," Dominique answered. "Not forgiveness you haven't asked for." He nodded like he'd expected nothing but had needed to hear it said straight. The agents guided him back in with a touch to the elbow. The door shut with the sound of someone tying a knot. By early afternoon the docket bled into overflow. An impromptu help desk on the lawn processed transcripts under a tent that had seen flea markets. The state set up a scanning station under an oak. Chain of custody forms clipped to boards began to look like a paper forest. A kid with a drumline bag stood by the curb and tapped a cadence under his breath. The rhythm found Danielle's shoes and steadied them. Inside, one case stalled. A clerk couldn't locate the original intake form, the room cooled by a degree, the bad old chill of lost paperwork. Then the public defender rolled the dolly closer with a file labeled in careful block letters. "Copy retained by counsel." She produced a scan of the missing sheet, metadata printed in the corner. The stenographer's mouth twitched. The judge signed. The day stretched until it started to fray. Light shifted gold through high windows dusted by year. The court recessed to a low murmur. People ate standing up. Paper plates balanced on evidence boxes. A trooper laughed at something Luis said. The sound surprised him, and he checked himself, then didn't. On the western side of the building, a glazier crew craned a new pane into a cracked skylight above the municipal storage, where the worst of it had begun to end. Resin beaded along an edge, fine and clear. One bead hesitated in the hairline and then slipped into place, disappearing the way repairs are supposed to. The foreman tapped the glass twice with the back of his knuckles, a habit, a test, a benediction. Danielle watched from the landing and felt a knot in her chest agree to move. Still here, Maya's voice scratched at her elbow. She wore a ball cap against the sun and held her phone with the camera, pointed not at faces but at hands signing forms, at seals being pressed, at coffee being poured into paper cups, evidence of the slow "Unterleviset Kind." Still, Danielle said, "Oh, and your favorite line," Maya added, thumb flicking. They put it on a t-shirt. "It's a bad font." She grinned. Then Zobered. "You should eat." "I did," Danielle said. "You didn't," Maya said, and handed over half a sandwich that had given up being warm but hadn't given up being food. The last petition of the day belonged to a man who had not spoken above a whisper since the year his case was docketed. He stood, hands open on the rail, and tried. The whisper came again. Dominique stood at council table and spoke the sentence he could not. Plain and clean. Had didn't do it. It fit the record the way a stone fits its riverbed after enough time. Wilkes granted. Pen moving steadily to the bottom right of the page where signatures live. When it was over, nobody who mattered went out the front. They filtered through the side doors in twos and threes, downstairs rubbed smooth by decades of shoes, into a parking lot that held heat and future at the same time. The helicopter, circling all morning, had gone to chase another fire. Evening lowered itself onto the town like a shirt unbuttoned after a long day. On the sidewalk, a boy from earlier waited with a yellow lunchbox under his arm. He didn't ask for a picture. He just offered the box like an altar and said, "For the office." Inside, two flat stones veined white lay against plastic. Danielle lifted one. Cool, solid, threaded like the skylight her fingers could feel. Just by remembering. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged, shy, as if he'd carried something heavy and was glad to set it down. "My aunt says, we keep what works." He said, "We're keeping you." The lights in the courthouse switched from day to evening, colder, bluer, showing fingerprints. No one minded. The river took the last color and made it move. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and stopped. Morales locked the hall with a practiced twist, slipped the key into her pocket, and took a breath that went all the way down. Dominique touched the thin, wandering line in the stone of the stair, the hairline you couldn't notice until you did. Resin had found it earlier, or time had. Either way, the crack remained and did not threaten the step. She pressed her thumb there and left no mark. They walked toward the bridge without deciding to. Traffic combed the roadway. The water below held sky to account. They didn't talk about tomorrow's docket, or the 10th case, or the emails piling up with subject lines like request and thank you. And what now? They stood with the town at their backs and the river in front, and let the hum settle into a different key. No siren, no speech. Just whined over steel, a fragile sound you had to lean in to hear. The office used to belong to a man who sold annuities and optimism. The carpet still held the faint ghost of cologne, and the darker shape of a desk where nobody sits now. Mornings start with keys, a metal rattle that wakes the river-scented air, and the hum of a laser printer, clicking into a tempo of work. Flyers curl on a corkboard in take hours. How to request your file. What to bring, each pinned with the neat insistence of people who learned the cost of missing details. Maps have multiplied. The largest eats an entire wall, latticed with thread that crosses itself like a nervous system. Colored pins sprout through neighborhoods in clusters that mean something today, not just patterns in hindsight. Beside it, a whiteboard lists deadlines in a veteran's hand writs. Subbuenas, dessert packets, training modules, erasable and not. People queue before the door opens. A grandmother in orthopedic shoes brings a Ziploc of Polaroids and a folded citation. A line cook with onion-scented hands carries a pay stub and a memory of a Friday night. A preacher arrives with a ledger where he's logged the dates of life interrupted. They take chairs along a strip of baseboard heating, the heat off for months, but the habit of it staying. The room smells like coffee, paper dust, bleach, and rain tracked in on shoes. Danielle keeps the intake table clean, 2 stacks and 1 pen, always at a diagonal, a control learned from raids and turned toward paperwork. She fingerprints a man whose hands won't stop shaking, the ink rolling across ridges and valleys, every swirl a proof that he exists exactly as himself. She scans an envelope that has lived in a freezer for years and is dry enough now to crumble if you breathe wrong. She timestamps every handoff on a chain of custody form that would bore you if it hadn't saved you. Dominique takes the little room where the light is kinder and silence carries weight. She closes the door to a hand's width and lets people sit without being watched by the hallway. She asks for names and waits until real ones arrive. She writes slowly, in ink that doesn't bleed. As men who were boys, when this started, try not to cry into a box of tissues. She keeps in a drawer and only offers with a nod. Sometimes she asks one question twice, once with law, once with kindness. Morales carries herself like a person who finally returned a heavy thing to the ground and is still surprised her hands shake. Plain clothes, a wallet badge. She opens just enough. In the mornings she runs the levee and counts breaths between lamp poles. By noon she is across town, sitting in internal hearings where men say training with a sincerity that won't bend a single fact. She writes their names cleanly. After dark she knocks on doors where informants once lived, explains decertification like a sacrament, and drinks tepid water from low glasses because turning down hospitality would be sin. Hattie comes by with donuts and a short list written in fountain pen names the hospital chart never held. Because ERs aren't built for testimony. She sits heavy, shoulders remembering 1,000 night shifts, and waits until Danielle or Dominique needs to just sit too. She is the kind of quiet that steadies rooms. Not everything is orderly. Mid-September brings heat and hard rain. The river swells brown and crowded. The footing on the footbridge goes slick with algae. A car hydroplanes on Finch Street and knocks a mailbox flat, and men in fluorescent vests write it with the same careful insistence used in court. In the office, a ceiling tile darkens along an old seam, and then, during a meeting with 3 families, lets go a walnut-sized drip that lands with an indecent plop in the intake tray. Luis leans in through the doorway with a strip of painter's plastic and a staple gun, and nobody stops him, because sometimes help looks like saving paper from weather. Maya brings a humidifier, and the first 2 binders of her notes printed hard. The covers are clear plastic, and the spine labels lean because she lettered them walking between rooms. She set the new piece on the table without ceremony, a spreadsheet of seizures that should have been returned and weren't, cross-reference to campaign donations and permits that found signatures faster than petitions. Her ribs ache when she laughs. She laughs anyway, and calls bad fonts a disease. The television above the front desk stays low. It runs a loop of civic programming and school board meetings, the anchor gentle and relentless. One noon, a segment slips in training clips from the state, evidence handling with QR-coded zip seals, a new module on bystander intervention required for certification renewal. The narrator says duty to intervene in a tone that could teach reciting grace Danielle snorts tea up her nose and wipes her sleeve. They're hymning again. She says, Dominique says, then we'll sing on key. Keen's plea hits like a door closing, a little no slamming, just a soft thud that changes a room. He stands before a federal judge and answers yes. Your Honor, no. Your Honor, I did. The court filings say conspiracy and deprivation and abuse, the words stacked like bricks. He emerges into a gray day and a silence that belongs less to shame than to weather. His lawyer says cooperation. No one yells. Two kids on scooters clatter past the courthouse like punctuation. Rick's appeal doesn't budge the iron. The opinion reads, restrained and detailed. Patronize as weapon, pattern writ in minutes and miles, hubris as evidence. He learns the camera schedules of a different building, breaks up fights with a voice that doesn't carry anymore, and writes his name on a commissary slip in block letters that pretend to steadiness. The night trustee sees him rub the skin where a watch used to sit, a habit so deep it outlives metal. There is the matter of money. The oversight office is half grant, half bake sale, half organized stubbornness. Luis parks his coffee trailer at 7, steam white in the cool. People crush dollar bills into a tip jar shaped like a fire extinguisher. He jokes about refills counting as confession. The line laughs, the kind of laugh tired people allow themselves when the joke is true enough to live. In October, the Oversight Board convenes its first public session in a high school gym, a place where whistles and squeaks hung, folding tables bracket a horseshoe of microphones. A clock ticks in the way all public clocks do, too loud when nobody is talking, invisible when everybody is. A woman with a voice like a librarian calls the roll. Wilkes, hair thinner and shoulders looser, sits as chair and treats a microphone like a tool, not a throne. Old business, he says, then lifts a hand and smiles at the absurdity of the phrase, then moves on to new business with the pinpoint precision of someone who has learned the cost of wandering. A contractor with a bid leans into the mic, sells better lock sets, and then uses the word community in a sentence that doesn't need it. A teenager asks for a crosswalk near the park because somebody's granddad carries a cane now, and the SUV drivers don't. A woman asks, plainly, how to file a complaint without telling the town gossip first. Morales answers with a number and 2 names, and the promise of a 36-hour callback, then adds, without looking up from her notes, if nobody calls you back, call me. You know where they do. The victories are the kind that don't make good television and never trend. A man gets back from the evidence room, a photo album he thought he'd only see in his head. It smells like dust and stories. A caseworker mails a letter that says, cleared in the kind of font used for water bills. A mother who kept her son's hoodie in a plastic bag for 3 years finally washes it. The detergent, a small, clean chorus in the kitchen. The losses do not ask permission. A woman, furious and correct, stands outside the office at closing and screams until her voice breaks. Because the timeline cannot bring back a year, no one interrupts her. Hattie leans against the door frame from inside and presses tissues into the woman's hand, only after the shaking slows. On a Tuesday before winter bites, the glazier who fixed the municipal skylight arrives with a thick envelope. He smells like cold glass and coffee. He slides a laminated 8x10 across the table, an image from the day the pane was replaced. The crack is frozen in the print, a white vein through blue, a drone's reflection, a silver eye. Sometimes the break teaches you more than the fix, he says, and leaves without taking the donut offered. The lunchbox sits on the intake shelf, yellow dulled to mustard. People tuck small souvenirs there, an ankle monitor clip turned paperweight, a key on a ribbon whose lock has been changed, a church program with a picture of a man now getting his Sundays back. Danielle keeps 2 flat stones from the boy's gift on her desk and sets one on each corner of maps to keep them honest. When she moves them, there's a clean square under each, the shape of absence as proof of presence. Evenings, the town's quiet shifts keys, trucks downshift across the bridge, the sound low as a big animal clearing its throat. The courthouse clock chimes. Once, twice, one time, adding an extra when the bell sticks, and the town chooses to call it 4. Streetlights throw circles of imperfect gold. Across those circles, walk people who know each other again. One night the office thins late. Paper shuffles itself into neat gratitude. The vacuum sits like a squat patient in the corner. Dominique flips the open sign not to closed but to see you tomorrow, because it makes her feel less like the world ends at 5. She locks the door and pockets the key. The motion practiced now, and turns toward the river like a plant finding light. On the bridge, they lean their elbows into concrete smoothed by generations. The hairline crack they always find has greened. A spear of grass has rooted in the seam. It moves when the wind moves, stubborn and precise. Down below, the current shoulders past the piling, brown with leaf and sky. Beautiful because it isn't trying. They don't talk about what comes next like a plan you could decorate. They talk about appointments, the DCERT hearing at 9, the training session at the armory at 11, the intake at 1, the kid who needs a ride because the bus doesn't go that far on Thursdays. They talk about a stove Luis is buying for the new bar, and whether the handle faces the room or the wall, if you've had your hands burned. A train ghosts the far bank, light wells in the courthouse cupola. Somewhere a dog barks twice, and then saves its voice. Maya, on a bench with a scarf pulled high, lifts a hand but doesn't rise. Morales lopes, past in running shoes, breath counted, shoulders loose. Danielle sets 2 fingertips against the crack. Hello, not repair. Dominique mirrors the gesture. For a beat, their hands make a bracket that holds the thin seam on purpose, not fear. The concrete is cold in that way that tells the truth. The river doesn't listen and doesn't need to. We keep what works, Dominique says, and we fix what doesn't. Daniela answers. They let their hands fall and their shoulders stay high. The wind presses them like a palm. The water goes on, the only sermon the town still believes in. In the end, this story is less about headlines and more about everyday courage. It reminds us that dignity doesn't arrive with a title. It's something we defend in small, stubborn ways, by telling the truth when it's uncomfortable, by refusing to laugh off cruelty, by standing beside someone when the room gets quiet. Silence can be a shelter, but it can also be a cage. When we speak calmly, clearly, together, we turn pain into proof and witnesses into neighbors. For those who've lived long enough to see cycles repeat, the lesson is plain. Real gold doesn't fear the fire. It's refined by it. The long road tests the horse, and character is the footing that carries us across. We may not fix a system in a day, but we can fix the part of it we touch, how we listen, who we believe, which lines we refuse to cross. That's how we unlearn prejudice, step out of toxic patterns, and rediscover our own worth. Justice isn't an event. It's a habit formed in kitchens, in church basements, on front porches, and yes, sometimes in court. You reap what you sow, but only if you plant, water, and keep showing up. If this story stirred something in you, I'd love to hear your reflections. What moment stayed with you? Have you faced a silence that needed breaking, or helped someone find their voice? Share in the comments. Press like if this resonated, and subscribe so you won't miss the next deep, dramatic story we explore together. Until then, I wish you a gentle evening, quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat, steady enough to carry hope, and warm enough to remind you that peace can grow back, even after the storm,